Hey, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of Unstructured Unlocked. I'm your co host, Michelle Govea.
And I'm your co-host, Tom Weil. Well, Michelle, I'm really excited today about this guest, Vinod Srinivasan, who is the just recently former VP of InsurTech Partnerships and Data Strategy and Analytics. Now working on some consulting projects, but Vinod's got a really interesting perspective on how big carriers have tried to embrace data and AI and where successes happened and where challenges lie. So that's our topic today. Really looking forward to it. Vinod, welcome.
Hey, thank you for having me here.
Excellent.
Very excited to
Well,
have you.
so maybe let's start with, given your role at Travelers around InsurTech partnerships, maybe start broad brush. What was your experience with what is the right role for InsurTechs, right? They're popping up left and right. They become an important part of the insurance landscape. But what's the right mentality for large carriers to leverage them and maybe some of the lessons learned there?
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question. Look, I mean, I've had the front row seat in watching insurance industry in general grapple with all the promise of the new technologies, right? But really, the realization of those promises were often less than satisfactory for many reasons. I'll explain. But what I'm very excited about now is the fact that we might just have reached that inflection point, right? Where thanks to AI, we're not anymore talking just automating of tasks, right? We're now talking about orchestrating experiences across the entire business ecosystem. Well, now that's pretty exciting because we've been for a long time promised for such an experience, but never really fulfilled that for many reasons that are less to do with the actual innovative technologies that insurtechs bring. It's a function of the complex environment that most insurance companies, have to reconcile with. So, what has been the challenge for a long time is that how do you overcome that technical barriers that are more internal to the institutions, less to do with the phenomenal innovation that the marketplace providers are bringing in. I think the last year, 6 to a year, in the last few months, so to speak, right, thanks to agentic AI, we might have just addressed that challenge, right? The idea of disambiguating that internal complexities and be able to traverse across that consistent, cohesive experience might just be the reality. But then again, if that's the reality that's possible, what is it that carriers have to do in terms of preparing for it? I think that's where, to your point, the question that you asked, how should insurtechs be viewed? We really have to stop looking at them. I mean, I'm part of the blame too, by the way, back when I was doing, which is looking at them as how good is your platform and solution for solving a particular problem? That's the proverbial question that we often ask, right? You come in and say, all right, we do ingestion very well. We could do loss runs very well. Okay, great. Let's assess your model's ability to address that problem
Right.
in a very contained state of question, right? But now I think what the lesson that I've learned, at least, and more practical learnings, to be honest, is how we should be asking the right set of questions, which is how do you fit into my internal ecosystem? How do you collaborate within my internal ecosystem? How do you exchange data? How do you govern data? That's what we should be really thinking and evaluating from a framework of assessment of insurtechs, less to do with how we were used to do in the past as, performance and cost and efficacy of that one particular problem that they were trying to solve for.
I think that's
Yeah.
a really interesting point, Vinod. And I'm going to say what everyone is probably sick of me saying, which is the compliance or the regulatory word. And you can tell that when I worked at Travelers, I worked in a compliance driven
Yeah.
organization just by my typical topics. But the point you made is interesting in that, I think all 10 to 15 years or kind of the last big wave of transformation was the big core system, wave moving from legacy or homegrown to those. I guess they're now somewhat legacy, but that big transformative
Yeah.
project. And that was more, you did have to look at the technology as a holistic solution, right? I mean, you could buy just like a billing center solution or a claim solution, but typically you were buying the entire package, right? Because you had this platform that it wasn't changing what the output would be for the insurance carrier, right? But it was the technology. I think
Mm.
now maybe a shift or a change between that and implementing insurtech solutions and thinking about it as an ecosystem piece or, AI solutions is that there is a compliance and regulatory component that is different than what those big transformation projects were because you weren't really changing the data that you had in-house, the data that you were leveraging to move throughout that, but now you are because 'cause you're bringing in third-party data, you're using it differently, it's automating decisioning. So I'm curious your thoughts on more of that. How because some carriers may be technologically ready to implement, but they may be afraid they're getting too far ahead of what the regulatory landscape will allow them to execute on. Curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, that's an awesome question again. Look, I mean, there is a vast spectrum of carriers in the market, right? Those with phenomenal scale and capital, and they can dispose that in any way they choose to and try to solve certain problems in the way they are. And then there are the vast spectrum of others who can't really afford that, right? There's this big, dichotomy that exists in the marketplace as it is today. And the middle ground is actually equally complex. You got the mid-sized carriers with enough of the scale to recognize the opportunity, but not enough resources to pursue the comprehensive transformation that you're highlighting. Personally, I think the single ecosystem seduction I find it to be very, fascinating because yes, most hyperscalers want you to live within that ecosystem of single ecosystem that solves all problems. But the ground reality is business workflows don't operate that way, let
Mm,
alone the fact that you can still contain everything, many of your business workflows into one ecosystem. The notion that somehow you have to operate within that very contained, experiential layer, it feels extremely, limiting in my mind, right? We really have to start thinking about the ground reality of a very heterogeneous insurance ecosystem. Quite frankly, it's more than insurance. Any domain for that matter, it is going to be the way it is. In the past, what were we saying? We were saying, let's get all the data into one conformed state so that we can unlock the potential. And we
mhm,
spent millions of dollars in pursuing that dream, and only to realize the unlocked potential went from 80/20 to 20/80 now. Because you didn't really pay attention to all the unstructured data that you have to have the same discipline of how you managed the structured data,
mhm,
right? Therein lies the problem. This notion that the single version of the truth, my pursuit to keep everything conformed in one place, only then AI and accuracy and quality and fidelity of the data is going to be achieved. It's kind of like a frankly, it's not a pursuit that's going to be viable economically for most carriers, so to speak. And for a long time, people were struggling with how am I going to address what was previously relegated to only big players. With agentic AI, thankfully, there you could very much keep where the data resides and start to layer in the context carrying over across the business workflows. This is not something we were thinking in the past. Now we have to think very differently. Rather than the single ecosystem idea, the notion should very much around what's the data foundation that we have to have in place to making sure that the right level of API wrappers are around your legacy systems. Good portion of the systems are going to be legacy too, right? How do you expose that data to a modern storefront? How do you manage your master data for customer policy claims type of entities that you need to expose? How do you create, streaming information for where it is real-time business events like, perils and things of that nature, or building like almost a proactive monitoring capability across kind of thing. So where I'm going is less to do with what technology we bring in, more to do with how do we manage the data, and the right architectural principles should be the focus. If you did those things, then your ability to govern across the workflows as opposed to a fragmented governance that exists today. You got governance within billing, governance within policy management, governance within claims. But ask anyone, do they have a holistic governance across the business workflows end to end? That's not a reality most people live in. So I feel personally that the the focus for larger players should be more around how you manage your data ecosystem, and then bring partners into this ecosystems that kind of cohabitates the right way, so that you can have a no decision opacity across, or no governance fragmentation across, or no integration brittleness across. Those are the kind of parameters that we need to start looking at. as opposed to how we were doing in the past, which is let's go find the best in class and bring it in. And that never really worked as well as people thought it would.
On, like, the core systems that have now created their own ecosystems or marketplaces, I'm interested from your perspective and the role you had at Travelers, does being part of that type of network make it easier to partner with those insurtechs? What other gates or hurdles might they encounter that a direct one-to-one engagement, might not bring forth, or is it really doesn't matter either way?
I think it helps for sure. Your barrier to entry is vastly diminished by being part of that marketplace. But at the same time, carriers should also start to wonder, or at least start to look into the ecosystem compatibility assessment that they have to do as well. So being part of a particular ecosystem, what does that mean in the grander sense of, its overall efficacy across things outside that ecosystem? So we have to start asking the questions in a way where, you know, any platform selection, any provider, solution provider selection should be more anchored around, how compatible is it across my entire business workflows that lives in a heterogeneous ecosystem. That's how we should be measuring the success. Less to do with, are you in? I'm going to make some numbers up, some things up here. Are you in a Databricks marketplace or a Snowflake marketplace or a Salesforce marketplace? They all have a marketplace. Every hyperscaler wants to have one, and for a reason, because they're starting to see the value of a ecosystem view, but an ecosystem built around their system. We have to start to disambiguate that in a very different way to say, as a carrier, what is the right type of ecosystem I want to have that begins with the principle that it is going to be heterogeneous in nature. Now let's start looking at business workflows that traverses across and then start to fit in the pieces the right way. So in your case, intake. How does your platform fit into the digital intake space where, it's a seamless transition of data that you're extracting and data that needs to be integrated to make the decision points in the space where, the intelligence is sitting there, which not often is the book of records area, not often is the experiential layer. There's a whole analytical system that's out there where your data needs to cohabitate very well with it so that they can make the right type of decisions at the right spot. But that's my opinion at this time. It definitely adds value to being part of it, but the carriers will have to be more bring more scrutiny around how compatible is it any choice they make within their entire ecosystem, not any hyperscaler.
I wanted to call back to one of the comments you made at the start, which I thought was interesting. That we may have hit an inflection point in the ability to finally leverage the sort of customer's core assets with the vendor's capabilities. And there's another quote that I think I mentioned to you that I've stolen from you liberally, which is, we're in a race to the starting line, not a race
Correct.
to the finish line. And I often use that. Has your opinion changed on that? Is that, do you still feel like the carriers are in a race to the starting line to be able to leverage these things, and or are there some technical changes, since, oh, geez, it's amazing how quickly things change. But even in the, say, year since you and I had that conversation, things like model context protocol, does that mean that maybe you don't have to do so much work to do data preparation? You can leave it where it is, and things like MCP and other capabilities suddenly make it more viable. Curious where you think we are, especially in the year that's passed since we, we had that conversation and so much has happened.
Well, I mean, I don't think my opinion has changed at all in
Mm,
that regard because, to be honest, we're not a technology company; we're an insurance company.
yeah.
We should be kind of reminded of every now and then as to where the bread is getting buttered here. We're more the underwriting organization with the discipline of underwriting and the expertise that brings in. We're not a Google that does extraction of data from different types of documents and stuff. So my point is, we need to be able to econ- very economically do certain things in a way where it gives us the building block, but not necessarily the actual recipe that you're delivering, right? Certain pieces like these type of extraction game, enrichment game, all of those things are it's better suited where you take advantage something that is doing that marketplace innovators have already done very well. That's all they do. So that's the expertise they bring. How quickly can you capitalize on that? and then focus on the true principles of underwriting as to how do you evaluate the risk? Do you have all the right data necessary to evaluate the risk at the right way? That should be the focus. So I still believe how the differentiating carriers in my mind are the ones that are going to capitalize on their full capacity of data that they're sitting on. Most don't fully take advantage of that yet. So that's where the energy should be spent, really.
And where do you so when you talk about how we crossed into this point capability now, what's some of the things that make you feel like we maybe are past that tipping point? What's happened recently that makes you feel that way?
Well, I think the sophistication that I'm seeing with these language models that are coming out on a daily basis,
Yeah.
it's pretty yeah, almost fascinating to the extent it is doing what you and I probably dealt with it 5 years ago, and we could have dreamed about this type of
Yep.
precision and accuracy that we're getting at the consistency as well. But in the insurance world, you know this very well than anyone else is it's not the extraction game. It's the extraction and enrichment game. It's the validation of the declared information game. It's the how quickly can I ascertain the all the variables, the risk variables that are available in different kinds of fidelity, different kinds of data sources, not just all sitting in one place. The internal, first party, second party, third party. So systems that are capable of acquiring all this information contextually and bringing it all together so that the underwriter can make an effective decision is really the real race that you're running
The
against,
Holy
right?
Grail. Yeah.
Right? That's the race we should be running at. So what does that mean? That means I'm going to get things that are easily acquirable in the marketplace at a favorable cost proposition. I'm going to go back to the original words I used. Find the right partners that can very well collaborate into my ecosystem, not point to point solution providers. So I literally want to have those type of partners in the game to say, okay, let's hook you into my ecosystem that I'm trying to solve here, which is the commercial insurance space, digital intake and risk evaluation and generating of indicative quote in the faster, best way back to the broker. That's the game, right? How quickly can I bring the right type of partner systems into the mix so that I'm able to achieve that end outcome? So if I were to do that end outcome focused approach of delivering a very good quote or a reliable quote back to the broker at the lowest possible time differential that we're talking about, why would I be sitting here trying to figure out how well I can extract a form? If I can get that piece of the business done from a partner who's collaborating with me within my ecosystem, that's the path I would take because I'm more interested in taking that data combining with my internal data, combining with my intelligence, layering in some level of my proprietary intelligence, and delivering an outcome, which should be where I should be spending my time the most.
I don't know, it is a little bit of, um, maybe catch 22 isn't the right phrase, but, there we talk a little bit about POC fatigue and, Vinod, your point, which I agree with on the ecosystem view. Sometimes I think that might be a friction against how these engagements do get started with
Mhm.
insurtechs because and this obviously it varies by carrier. It varies if you're a monoline carrier for a very, I'll call it simple, straightforward, data set of information you need for underwriting versus something more complex, maybe in the specialty commercial space. But for some of these solutions that can be applied very widely with multiple use
Mhm.
cases or are more generally applied and not focused on something very specific, you do still tend, from the carrier perspective, to say, well, we still do need to vet your solution. And so we're going to start in this very specific area because if you can do this, then we know you can do the rest. Or let's try and get a quick win and apply you to the easiest point and then roll you out slowly to the areas of more complexity. And so I'm having a hard time thinking about how you get around that because there is still that element of we are now entrusting automation decision making to a third party. And so just how, I mean, Travelers is obviously a large carrier, multiple lines of business. Organizationally, I'm not sure how it's structured for insurtechs coming in, but to me, that's just it's a very difficult problem to wrap your head around,
Yeah.
trying to move from that one sales approach or that partnership approach to, "Let's just go all in."
Let's just get real here.
Yeah.
The idea that everyone is saying the POC graveyard that's happening right now is largely because of that thinking, which is I
Mhm.
need to look at it in a much more narrow view to prove you first
Yeah.
before I figure out. That's the whole procurement mindset than a partnership mindset in my mind. Uh,
Mhm.
the notion of doing feature comparisons as opposed to doing architectural compatibility assessment, the idea of I need to optimize my ROI versus building an ecosystem, or need to manage this vendor versus co-innovate with them. So there's a fundamental shift that needs to happen here because the traditional mindset is what you're referring to, which is
Mhm.
prove me in a narrow before I can go wide.
Yeah.
So I don't think there is a magic silver bullet yet. People are learning through the experiences in my mind, and they're starting to realize that it's too many there's a lot of congestion in the marketplace in terms of point-to-point solution providers. So you're going to have to figure out a very different assessment criteria in finding that partner to be part of your conversation, to co-innovate and collaborate.
Mhm.
So they might not be the right answer for everything, but they might have the right potential for the future they can collaborate with. So that's where we need to go. So what is that bare minimum that you have to do? The bare minimum that you have to prove from a technology assessment standpoint. Those are the frameworks that we need to start to look at very differently. It's less to do with how good are you in a property data extraction. It's more to do with how good are you if you were to do those extractions, because I know you're going to do those things very well because the tech is changing so fast. But the real question is, how well will you integrate within my world? How well can I govern the data that you originate and the data that I merge with and have that holistic view of end-to-end decision traceability? That's where we need to go quickly, because otherwise we'll be on this the total paralysis of let me do 5 data element extraction to see if I can clear my submission faster.
So this is a fascinating point. So I'm glad you brought this up because I've experienced this recently over the last few months. So to bring Indico's perspective into the discussion for a second, we definitely are evolving our solution much more around what you described, which is what is the end goal, the business end goal, right? And in our case, we frame it as essentially speed to quote and
Mhm.
increasing your submit to quote ratio, right? So that's
Right,
the business goal.
right.
So what's been fascinating though is when we go in and we pitch it that way and show the pieces along that value chain to achieve that, I would say that 100% of the time, the reaction from the customer has been, "Hey, that's really interesting, but that's not really our problem. Our problem, talking to the person across the table, is extraction. All that other stuff you talk about, that's a different team or different teams." And so it's become really clear to me just what you're saying that there isn't a role typically inside big carriers of a more product management perspective, which is who is the customer, the underwriter internally, and what is the product? The product is the sort of mini end-to-end solution to go from submit,
Yeah,
to quote. There isn't a team or a person who owns that. And so you have to sort of, as a vendor, stitch together a set of teams to make them care about
yeah.
that. Quite frustrating and a little bit surprising when I first started getting that feedback, but I would say it's 90 100% of the time.
It is. As much as I hate to hear that, but it is the ground reality we live in. So at some point, these larger institutions will have to start asking the question: Is the method that we're practicing today working? If it is not working, what's not working, and how do we go about addressing it differently? You can't keep repeating the same things again and again, expect a different outcome, right? I think there is this convergence event that is happening, Tom. You probably know this. It's in the past there was the system of records and system of intelligence and system of experience. When you talk to people that you are engaged in, they're probably one of those pillars. Not they're not thinking all three pillars together, right? So in
Right.
future, if you were to take a digital experience as from a product minded view of the world and say, what is that end to end digital experience? And how do we define success in the context of broker placing a business and broker getting an indicative quote, and then we are able to do the fast no, and we are able to pick the right risk that we want to write, and then respond back at the fastest way with the right code to the guy. If that is the outcome that we are going after, and it is not kind of narrowed down to just one part of the decisioning process, which is clearing versus triaging versus
Yeah.
risk evaluating versus pricing versus rating. That's we are talking like this in discrete terms. We need to talk what's the right way to get back with that ultimate outcome, and then look into your internal setup and say, are we in a way set up to answer some of those pieces of the puzzle today? If you're not, where is the most optimal way I can gain acceleration through marketplace innovation, but make that participation a mandatory requirement of compatible to play within my ecosystem so that I have complete transparency on the decisioning process end to end. I'm talking about the ultimate decision that you're trying to take, and then kind of break that, decompose that into all the pieces that needs to fit into that puzzle. This is the thinking we need to have. And for a long time, I felt like this was relegated to some sort of a innovation function.
Mhm.
Right.
Really, innovation function. It's the way you run the business function, and most folks will have to start to reconcile that soon. Otherwise, just yeah.
And Michelle, just I just want to build on that with a follow on here.
Mhm.
I think this is where build versus buy comes from because this is something that has always puzzled me, right? Like, why would a carrier want to build extraction technologies as an example? How did they possibly see that as building a competitive advantage?
Yeah.
I think when you think about it end to end, what I think the carrier should be quote unquote building is the carrier should own their data fabric and their process fabric, and then be
Yeah.
able to weave in solutions into those fabrics to deliver on this end to end. That makes sense to me because I think you can actually build advantage thinking of it that way. What do you think of that?
Well, that's look, for those that have limited resources and capacity, that's probably the only option have on
Yeah.
the table. The problem is not those guys. The problem is the ones with the infinite capacity, capital and capacity that have the ability to attempt some of those
Yeah.
harder problems to solve for, even though it's not really the problem that they should be solving for, right? I think it's very, very important. As I was mentioning before, the convergence of those three pillars is going to force the discussion in a very different way, which is, look, I really need to own my data. So, how do I make sure that I manage my data and unlock the full potential of my data? If you anchor on that, then what are the pieces that are going to complement that function that I just represented? Is it how do I extract the data, or how do I manage the extracted data in context and use it at the right point at the right place so that I can make full utility out of it, right? That's where I think people will have to get there quickly. And frankly, what I'm also seeing in the marketplace is while you have ecosystems that are solving problems similar to that kind of traceability, lineage, quality, that sort of thing, but it is sort of relegated to within their ecosystem. It's not something that can traverse outside of that. So I'm almost wondering that carriers need to start thinking about that what's that new data foundation concepts of tomorrow. It's not move it from on-prem to cloud. You already know you're not going to get full ROI out of that
Yeah.
because you didn't really apply that discipline for unstructured data, which is where the full unlocked potential is. So they need to go back to the drawing board now to say, how do I expose my legacy assets in a way that can be accessible, discoverable, and how do I manage quality across? How do I, you know, create setups to bring in external data easily? When you're talking about, usage-based insurance and driving behaviors and things like that, those are not easy things to do. Focus on getting the setup right so that you're able to have access to and visibility and acquisition of those type of data and manageability of that data. That's where the energy should be spent. Not building your own, telematic system or building your own engines. Do it if you want to, but I don't know if that's the prudent choice I would make if I was in that shoe.
Vinod, I feel like you just laid out the job description for some new C-suite job that no one has yet. Like 10 years ago, everyone was getting a chief data officer. That was the new thing. Now it's going to be like some chief ecosystem officer or something that everyone's going to start hiring, just like, chief AI officer or something. Because there's going to be, I think you're right, a wave and a push to look at things this way. And it is a different mindset and a different way of approaching the organization.
Because the competition has leveled up. The
Hmm.
folk that didn't have the capability because it took a lot of effort and cost to get in to play that game is no longer that. So if the playing field has leveled up, what are you going to do differently now? Because your ideas of the past that gave you the differentiation no longer is the differentiating ideas for the forward. So we need to start thinking very differently in lieu of the agentic future state, where what is that unified AI orchestration concept? What is that cross-system observability that I need to have in my place? Or what is that domain-aware intelligence that I need to have? Those are the what we need to be thinking. Less about those, the what I call peripheral things that you should be able to economically acquire it if one available for that can play well in your ecosystem.
Maybe even I'll ask a question on behalf of my fellow insurtechs. What are some of the common pitfalls insurtechs fall into when approaching and pitching big carriers, to see if there's a potential for a partnership there? You had the chance, I'm sure, to talk to hundreds of insurtechs. What were some of the patterns of success versus failure that you observed?
Well, it's hard. It's getting harder and harder to differentiate
Yeah.
in that space now. Every pitch sounds the same,
Yeah.
feels the same, which might be okay, which is the function of the technology ramp up that's happening in the marketplace. So I'm starting to see, at least pay attention to those that are, one have spent the time in understanding the business in a way where they have brought a ecosystem of partners already into the mix.
Mm,
So there's less onus on the carrier to figure out, how do I get, okay, this is good that you're bringing in, but what about this? The what about this should not be an effort on the carrier side to go and figure it out. So in most cases, I think the interesting pitch, I'm not going to say it's a winning pitch yet, the interesting pitch that appears to be very differentiating compared to the rest that I hear is those that are coming in and saying, look, we very well know this is the what I call, commodity capabilities. This is this.
yeah.
Here our layer of differentiation that we've added on top, and here is what it means to you as a result of that. And I personally think, this is my view again, this is Vinod's view, is most differentiating ones in the future are going to be more around, like I said, your internal ecosystem compatibility. How do you pitch that? How will I come and play well in your sandbox is going to be the winning argument. Because if you leave it to the onus of the carrier to figure out how to integrate your amazing platform in their world, it's still 50 meters of the 100-meter race that you're running
Yeah.
and you don't control the last 50. That's the worst thing you can do, right?
Mm.
Because you have an amazing platform, the utility and the full value of that platform is not getting realized, and it's no fault of yours. And that's where we need to go. How will you fit in? How will you collaborate? What are the partners that you're bringing in already? How are you thinking about data governance? How are you thinking about regulatory compliance? How are you thinking about enrichment, acknowledging the fact that the data is poor quality? This is where I think the differentiating insurtechs will come. Otherwise, you I'll tend to hear them more like the traditional IDP players.
Mhm.
Hope that helps.
Maybe the wrap up question here, our sort of big bang wrap up question. This is a sort of a paradox that I think about a lot. So, insurance is in the business of probabilities, right?
Mm.
So, it's all about trying to figure out probabilities to turn that into something deterministic. In this case,
Yeah.
generally a price, right? The price represents all the probabilities that the carrier is attempted to figure out. And then generative AI shows up in agentic AI, which is by its very nature a stochastic tool, right? It is in and of itself a probabilistic tool. And especially with agentic, and I've seen a few people write about this, and I have this concern too, that with agentic, if you are stitching together a series of Gen AI models, you are stitching together probability times probability times probability, which we know mathematically equals a bigger probability, not a smaller probability.
Yeah.
So use your crystal ball. Is this the answer, or does something else have to come along? Because insurance companies need to be able to distill down to some kind of deterministic capability to be able to price and ultimately even to adjudicate risk on the claim side. Are we down the wrong path? And not a loaded question. Are we down the wrong path, or is there a way to make these stochastic tools fit into the reality of what insurers need to be well compliant and also to deliver value to the customer?
Well, look, most regulators are moving beyond your simple AI disclosure
Yeah.
requirement, right? Requiring your mandating a comprehensive AI governance framework. That was in the past. Now, if you really look at the latest NAICS guidelines and all, they're moving towards more end-to-end AI auditability, explainability across all the business process. It's not just individual AI models anymore, right? They're
Yep.
starting to get there. So what that means is we really have to start thinking about the orchestration gap that exists in an internal ecosystem of carriers. It's not how much more AI capabilities do I need to invest. There's no positive, a lack of AI tools and capabilities within a large institution like some of my former employers. They have much matured and they have all that. That isn't the gap. The real gap is going to be around the orchestration that needs to happen between business processes, between different data platforms. I'm talking about those three pillars: the system of records, and the system of intelligence, and the system of experience. How are you going to converge those three while maintaining the discipline of auditability, traceability of decisions that are happening in those processes? So that's the big question. So I think something there is still a fundamental gap because there isn't one that is holistic yet. If there is one, that will be very conducive for most carriers to take advantage of, because what that means is it allows them to plug in players very quickly and not compromise on the observability pane that they need to be operating on to be able to answer the question that you just asked, which is take a decision, blow it up, give me the complete lineage of all the data that went in, both structured and unstructured, the sources, the workflows, the personas. Ask that question now. No one will be able to give you a simple answer to that. It just doesn't exist because no one is set up that way. And most insurance carriers are acquisition based business model. They have acquired significant technology debt over the years. So which goes back to what I was saying. If I had capital and internal cycles, where would I deploy? I would start looking at my foundation. I would start looking at fronting my less modern systems in a way I can expose that data. And then I would think about having that manageability layer on my end and own my data. That's where I need to put my energy on. In the meantime, plug all the players in my ecosystem that works well within my governance framework. If that happens, we're focused on the outcome at that point.
Well, thanks, Vinod. That's a wonderful summary here for our conversation and a great stopping point. Michelle, I think we'll wrap here. We've been talking to Vinod Srinivasan, who is an expert in insurtechs and insurance data and analytics.
Thank you, guys.
Joining.
I really enjoyed.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Vinod.